Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 257, I chat with Jim Helman, CTO of MovieLabs, about SMPTE standards for the next generation of video. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded May 28th, 2015. Episode 257, Next Generation Video Standards. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Jim Helman, CTO of MovieLabs, and one of the people working very hard on the SMPTE standards for next generation video. Hey, Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks.
So nice to have you here. I want to also thank SMPTE for helping to arrange your appearance here on Home Theater Geeks, because that's what we're going to be talking about today, are the standards for next generation video. And SMPTE, of course, is right at the heart of that effort. And Jim is working on that very diligently. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Those of you who are tuned in to the live stream at live.twit.tv, where you can join the chat room, either there or at irc.twit.tv. And you can ask questions as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. So, Jim, let's start with you. You work, your day job, so to speak, is at a place called MovieLabs. Tell us what that is and how it relates to the whole television, movie, entertainment ecosystem.
MovieLabs is a technology joint venture of the 6 major Hollywood studios. So Disney, Fox, Paramount, Sony, Universal, and Warner. And we were started back in 2006 with a purpose to foster innovation around digital distribution technologies. The studios decided they had a common cause in making their content available more efficiently in digital forms. So we do a lot of work in different areas. We do some supply chain work. We're very active in a group called Ultraviolet that helps with digital distribution to consumers. We started something called the Entertainment Identifier Registry to be the ISBN numbering system for audiovisual assets. We also been looking at interactivity and ways to deliver digital extras as physical media eventually declines. We really need to be able to get that bonus material and extra content to consumers, and there are no standards to do that digitally. But also, which is the purpose of this discussion here today, we've been very active in getting the studio's feature set for next generation video standardized so that it's available to be implemented in next generation video formats, such as the upcoming new Blu-ray specification.
Well, this is obviously a really important thing to do because without standards, we get competitive systems, and we're going to talk about that a little later, but you know, things like different ways to do things. And so the manufacturers of TV sets, the producers of content, all are sort of floating about and using different systems, and then none of them are compatible. I keep remembering, I don't know if you're aware of the music industry at all, but I keep remembering the effort that I was involved in now close to 30 years ago, more than, in which all of the manufacturers of synthesizers and electronic music gear came together and said, we need a common language, a common coding system to encode performance information that all of our different products can share. And thus MIDI, the musical instrument digital interface, was born out of the collaboration of companies that are otherwise competitors. Are we seeing something along those lines here?
Yeah, I think very much so. So the Dolby has been very active in developing especially high dynamic range video systems. And of course, they do a tremendous amount of work in audio traditionally, but over the last 8-9 years, they've been doing more work in high dynamic range video. So they're very active here. They have a proprietary solution called Dolby Vision, but they also have been very active in helping the studios and others establish a standardized base that can be carried into broader groups, such as Blu-ray, and into international standards groups such as the ITU.
Mm-hmm. I find it really interesting that Dolby Vision, which is a proprietary system, as you say, also a part of it anyway, has become incorporated into the SMPTE standards process, which we're going to talk about during this show. But I find it very interesting that part of it has now become part of a standard, but another part of it is still proprietary. I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. I guess we just have to sort of wait and see, but I find it very interesting.
Yeah, standards are always a bit challenging because you want to have a common way of doing something so that there's a definite target for everyone to implement to, but at the same time, you want to keep innovation alive. And so a lot of times, standards and proprietary systems, they develop together and in parallel, which is actually a good thing because it keeps the technology developing and moving forward.
Mm-hmm. A tricky balance to maintain for sure, though. Let's talk about dynamic range, high dynamic range, which in my view is the most important thing about the next generation of video. We already know that the pixel resolution is 3840 by 2160, exactly 4 times the number of pixels of high definition. But high dynamic range makes so much more of an impact on the picture than increasing the number of pixels, at least at normal distances, right? I mean, this has been well documented by now.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that the studios looked at the next generation video landscape and decided that high dynamic range was a key feature that needed to be in the mix. If you look at the human visual system, in everyday existence, especially if we spend a lot of time in a dark starlit sky, you have like 14 orders of magnitude, in the human visual system, and
however, am I not correct that the entire visual system, 14 orders of magnitude, you're not sensitive to that all at the same instant, right?
That's right. Yeah, and so there's a certain range that you're adapted to at any particular time, but
which is smaller than that. I think I read somewhere something like 5 orders of magnitude.
Yeah, I think that's in the ballpark.
And then that shifts up and down depending on the amount of ambient light that's around you. In other words, if you're out at night, then that's one thing. If you're out in the bright day, that's another thing.
And I think we have a figure here that shows sort of the range.
I think figure 1 probably shows that. Let's take a look at that. Number 1. There it is. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Well, so if you look all the way on the left side, you'll see sort of the range of light that's in our environment, ranging all the way from, starlight all the way up to if you were to stare directly into the sun, which you would.
Which we don't recommend.
For very long. But even just, sunlight itself is, on the order of 100 million candelas per meter square. It's a measure of luminance that is often called nits. So if you talk about it in terms of display, usually you'll call these nits. Right. And so if you look in the human visual system and the range that television has covered, it traditionally, the human visual system has different ranges for photopic all the way down to scotopic, which is basically black and white vision with just your rods being active. But if you look here, in the middle there with current TV, you see we cover a very, very small fraction of that. And certainly not even the range to which the human eye can be adapted to at any one particular time. And even creatively, you could say, well, actually, I creatively as a director, I'd like to be able to take the audience through dark and light adaptation. Maybe I'd like to have the real dark room, and then slowly their vision comes back and they can actually see things, or the being startled a little bit coming into a bright environment. So you want to capture at an absolute minimum the current adaptation range that's possible, but you really would like to go beyond that. And as you mentioned, looking at the impact on the consumer, there have been tests that show that high dynamic range is much more impactful in terms of visual quality as perceived by a consumer than, say, a higher spatial resolution that you get from going from HD resolution to Ultra HD resolution. And if we look at the next slide here, we sort of see what kind of a range of light you'll have in any particular scene.
That's number 2.
Yeah.
There we go.
And you'll see, in an interior scene, you can very easily have, a contrast range of 1,000,000 to 1. With you might have, a very dark area, and then compared with that, say, the filament of a halogen light bulb or something that you're seeing. And in an outdoor scene, things are much brighter, but even there, you can have some shadows that will get you up into a range of certainly 10,000 to 1, probably 100,000 to 1. So the current displays are not capable of those types of contrast ratios, and as a result, a lot of compromises end up getting made as this scene content is taken and mastered into the final product that you'll see in a cinema or on a television set. And that process in the mastering is done by colorists who creatively look at the story. What do I want to convey in this image? What do I want to have emphasized? And a lot of times they have to compromise. So, you'll have a scene that has a sky, a blue sky, and maybe it has white clouds, but that's very, very bright. But then you have some figures in the foreground. Now, if you had a high dynamic range environment, you would have a choice. I could keep the sky bright. I could keep the distinction between the clouds and the blue sky. But if you have a limited range, in order to keep the sky so it looks kind of bright enough, you'll actually have to bring the blues down and move them over into white to keep them bright enough. And so you'll end up creatively, in order to keep the sky bright enough to look real, you'll need to get rid of the blue. And things like specular highlights often just get rolled off. So if you have a reflection off of chrome, something shiny, you have a candlelight or a torch in a very dark scene, those often have to get rolled off or desaturated in order to have the desired brightness to those particular entities. And what we're really looking for here is to enable a greater range of creative choice in the mastering suite, so that then the director and the cinematographer can tell the story better and make the consumer experience richer in the home environment. So the existing video standards, video standards last a long time. Originally there was BT 601 was the digital standard for SD video, and it was used in Blu-ray. There's the next standard for HD, which is BT 709. These are standards that are promulgated by the International Telecommunications Radio Communications Division, which has traditionally defined the international video standards.
Right. The International Telecommunications Union, or ITU, has a subset called, I guess you're right, it's called the radio communications or radio telecommunications recommendations. And this is where we get 601, 709. 709 is the one we're currently using on HD TVs, with Blu-rays, with broadcast, with everything like that.
Yes, and so, you know, the work on the next generation standard, which is called BT 2020, was completed a few years ago, and it increases the resolution. So we now go from roughly 2,000 pixels horizontally to 4,000 pixels horizontally.
Roughly.
Roughly, yeah. It's not true 4K in the digital cinema sense. And it also expands the color gamut a little bit by moving the RGB primaries that define the color gamut out a little bit further. So
now we have a picture. We have a picture of the color gamuts of these different systems. I think it's figure 3, and we'll take a look at that where we can see the difference between. I'm sorry, figure 4. My mistake. There it is.
Yeah. So if you look at this, you'll see that the Rec 709 is that yellow triangle, which only covers a portion of the full color gamut. So what we're seeing here in this horseshoe-shaped graph is the set of visible colors expressed at a particular luminance level. So this is one slice through the three-dimensional color volume that we're actually rendering. But the primaries are the vertices of the triangle, and you can see the next largest triangle is the one that's currently used for digital cinema, which is DCI P3 primaries. And then you can see that Rec 2020, this next generation video format, went all the way out to the edge of the gamut. And the edge of the gamut represent single wavelength colors. So to reproduce these, you actually would need a laser if you're going to reproduce them completely.
That's a problem, as I can see it, for future TVs. I mean, certainly we can use lasers in projectors. Mitsubishi even used lasers in a rear projector some years ago, no longer available. But the only other way that I've seen that might be possible to do that is with an LCD TV using this quantum dot technology, which isn't really what we're talking about today. But just to as an aside, to reach that extreme color gamut of BT 2020, it seems we need either lasers, as you say, or possibly quantum dots. But otherwise, we're not going to get it. And so some people are advocating for the next generation to really kind of settle on P3, which is the same color gamut as we see in the commercial cinema.
Mm-hmm. Although I think at NAB, we did see a number of consumer-targeted television sets that were going beyond P3. They were advertising a percentage over the P3 color volume. But you're
true enough.
Going all the way to the edge is going to be very challenging. But you can get close, and I think that's going to be the target. But also, if you look at the chart, even those laser primaries, because you're trying to put a triangle on this horseshoe-shaped curve, doesn't cover everything, which is why for example, the digital cinema color system actually uses a set of non-realizable but non-physical primaries called cap XYZ. And
yeah, we have a picture of that as well. I believe it's number 5. Okay. There it is.
Yeah. So cap XYZ actually includes the full visible gamut and
everything humans can see in terms of color.
Right, and it's
and then some.
Yes, anything outside of the horseshoe is a color which you could not perceive.
Right. So why would a next generation format include primaries that are beyond what humans can perceive?
I think the goal, the same reason is for digital cinema, and also there's the ACES system, which the Academy has been promoting for part of the mastering process.
Right.
which also
ACES stands for Academy Color Encoding System, I believe. And
yes,
I've had a number, one or two shows on that very subject.
and it also uses primaries that are outside of the physical gamut. The advantage is you can represent any color, and you also are basically white point independent, because you no longer, when you have a particular set of primaries, especially if you've expressed those primaries at a particular luminance, the white point of that system is defined as the point at which all three primaries are at their maximum value.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a non-physical XYZ type color system lets you sort of decouple from the white point that might be native to a particular set of primaries.
Oh, that's interesting. I've got a couple questions in the chat room related to this. Terry K says, sounds like color gamut part of the spec is still TBD. When will it be resolved? And then I also got another related question from Blue Rules. If the 2160p or UHD Blu-ray is supposed to come out around the end of the year, fourth quarter, how long before the format comes out do you have to standardize something like high dynamic range?
Yes, and so I think for the current trajectory for next generation video, which now does include HDR, which I'll get into a little bit, the set of primaries is pretty well set on the BT 2020 laser primaries.
Okay.
MovieLabs and the studios, we actually would have liked to have seen things move all the way to an XYZ system, but that looks like, at least in the current generation of Ultra HD high dynamic range displays, we'll be using BT 2020. So I should probably get a little bit, then talk a little bit about the MovieLabs next generation video specification, which really helped kickstart this whole drive towards high dynamic range. So as we mentioned, so we had this traditional march of video standards going from BT 601 to 709 to BT 2020, and traditionally, the studios, when they did the first generation Blu-ray, they didn't go off and say we need to invent a new video system. They said, oh, okay, there's BT 709 out there, and that's what we'll use. In this case, in early 2013, the studios were looking at what was coming down the pike, and they said, we don't think it's all the way there. We really, we think high dynamic range is important, and actually the BT 2020 specification did not change the dynamic range at all. It increased the color gamut, and it increased the target bit depth a little bit. But as we'll get into, bit depth is not all you need in order to define an effective high dynamic range system. So MovieLabs and the studios, with input from all of their technical experts on color and video, developed this next generation video specification, which is available on our website if anyone wants to see it. It's movielabs.com/ng-video for next generation video. And it basically laid out a roadmap saying we want high dynamic range. We actually would like to have full color gamut. So we would like to go to an XYZ color system, which would be future-proof. We'd like 12 bits in order to ensure that there's no banding. I'm sure as most people are familiar from home theater systems, 8-bit 709 video, there are some places where you're going to be getting contouring or posterization because there's not enough resolution in those 8 bits to render color at the same perceptual resolution that the human visual system has.
And I think I actually have a picture to illustrate bit depth real quick here. If I'm not mistaken, I don't remember what number it is. Here it is. So here we have just a grayscale, not colors, but a grayscale. showing what happens as you increase the bit depth. The more bits you use to represent brightness, then the smoother the gradations between different levels of brightness become. And you can see on the left, it's very coarse. In the middle, it's getting finer with 4 bits. And on the right, it's looks like a smooth gradient because you're using so many bits. So this is one reason why you want more bits, right?
Yes, and if you can imagine now changing or increasing the range between black in those images and maximum white, you would imagine you need more bits for that,
Yes.
because you're now expressing a larger range of gradations. But the human perception within each one of those small gradations is not going to be changing. So the studios and MovieLabs made an input document to MPEG in July 2013 at their meeting in Vienna, which really sort of kickstarted this whole undertaking to standardize high dynamic range video, since the existing international standard wasn't accommodating it.
Isn't that weird that the ITU standardized a higher pixel count and wider color gamut, but not dynamic range? How odd.
Yeah, but that's the reason we decided that we needed to go and work on standardizing it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I'm glad you did.
And so we started off a group in MPEG to look at high dynamic range, which is still underway. But we also needed to build up the building blocks that would be needed in order for MPEG to support high dynamic range. So for the most part, the actual core of the codec, of the MPEG codec, is pretty agnostic as to the color space and what goes into it. Pretty much if you take a color difference video signal, that is a YCC, a YCBCR signal, the MPEG codecs are going to be pretty good at compressing that.
And by the way, I should just mention that MPEG stands for Motion Picture Experts Group. It's the body that defines the compression standards by which video gets, and audio for that matter, gets compressed and decompressed, thus the name codec, compression, decompression. Just want to make sure everybody understands the terminology here.
Yes, and some people may be more familiar with having heard about H.264 or H.265, which are the ITU names for the MPEG codecs, which from the MPEG side are known as AVC, the Advanced Video Codec, and HEVC, High Efficiency Video Codec. And so the current generation of codecs is now this HEVC H.265 standard. And what MPEG needs in order to support compression of other color systems is not necessarily changes to the core codec, but rather ways to signal in metadata that I'm using a different set of primaries, or I'm using a different mapping of digital 10-bit values or 12-bit values to actual light output. And so we went into SMPTE to work on standardizing those building blocks, and started 3 standards drafting groups, which are ST2084, ST2085, and ST2086, since we started them all about the same time, and SMPTE numbers things sequentially. And probably the most important of those is ST2084, which defines a new mapping, a new transfer function for converting digital signal levels to light output. And so 2084 defines what is called an EOTF, an electro-optical transfer function. It's still called electro. It used to be an actual voltage level going into the television set, but now it's actually a digital value. So maybe it should be called a digital optical transfer function. But so the the EOTF, for decades, ever since the beginnings of television, has always been this curve called gamma, which is an exponential curve. And it happened that it was the response curve for CRT displays. You feed a signal in to a CRT, and this is naturally what the tube would generate. It also turned out very beneficially for all the analog video standards at the time that it also was a perceptually a pretty good mapping. So, again, even in a voltage world, you would have noise, you'd have errors, and so you want the mapping of voltage to optical output to match the human visual system, to have smaller gradations where your eye is more perceptive, and then it could go to coarser gradations to save code values where your eye is less perceptive.
Now, interestingly, I added a graphic in here that shows the original gamma curves. I think it's number 6. Let's take a look at that. Here it is.
Right. So you basically, when you encode the optical signal in a camera, you use a gamma-based OETF, that is an optoelectric transfer function. And then when you convert back out from the code value, from the signal value to optical levels, then you apply the EOTF. And so
in this picture, the OETF in the camera is the red curve, and the EOTF in the TV or the display is the blue curve. And what you end up with is a nice linear increase in brightness as the code value goes up. Have I got that right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, in this picture, yes. In practice, actually, CRTs have a gamma of closer to 2.4. And so you actually end up with a system gamma mapping from camera input to display output that actually is not a straight line. And perceptually, that actually is good for the viewing environment, and people actually like it better. And so that's called a system gamma, which is sort of the end-to-end gamma curve. And this raises a very important point here, though, which is in the origins of video, the camera OETF was kind of what drove the system in a way, because you would take that and you might tweak it a little bit, but that was basically your signal. In the case of pretty much all scripted content, and even broadcast live content, it gets more sophisticated processing these days. But especially if you're taking a theatrical feature film into a grading suite, you're actually adjusting the colors so that they look good on the reference monitor or on the reference projector. And so what becomes important for defining a video system is not the OETF, but rather it's the EOTF, because you really want to define how was the signal intended to look. So on this reference display in a dim surround, this is what the creative intent was of the director and the cinematographer and of the colorist. And this also is another difference that 2084 has from previous transfer functions. So actually BT 601 and 709 actually define the OETF as the reference portion. It was only later in another specification called BT 1886 that the reference EOTF was defined.
And we actually had a show on that as well some time ago with Joel Silver of Imaging Science Foundation.
And the gamma value for the reference rendering, the BT 1886, which is intended for use with HD video, BT 709, is actually this gamma 2.4. It's not the gamma 2.2 that's used on the encoding side. But the other aspect of that is traditionally these electro-optic transfer functions have been relative. So whatever your peak scene luminance was, you encoded whatever your peak display capability that's what it would get mapped to. And that works within a certain range because, the reference peak luminance for BT 1886 is 100 nits, so 110 Dela per meter square. A lot of TVs today actually go to higher levels than that. 200, 300 nits is not uncommon. But a lot of that really ends up being used to sort of compensate for the brighter viewing environment because the mastering was done in a dim surround. Most, at least home living rooms, I'm sure a lot of your listeners with home theater environments have very dim surrounds, but it tends to be—
Not all of them.
It tends to be a brighter environment. And so really your eye is at a different adaptation level. And so you need to move the peak luminance up. When you start looking at high dynamic range, and that works because you bring everything up, including the black levels. When you talk about—
And you still have the same dynamic range, though, that as you did before. It's just everything kind of rises up a bit.
Right. And with high dynamic range, though, the way in which that extra headroom is being used is different. So if you think about a scene, say it's a scene with specular highlights coming off of car fenders, or say a red taillight, or a halogen light bulb, when you actually take that down in luminance, you don't want to shift it down. You actually want to roll it off. You want to do what's called tone mapping, because if you take the whole thing and shift it down, if you're displaying on say content was mastered on a 4,000 nit display, and your home environment only has a 1,000 nit display, well, you don't want to clip because clipping is going to cause other artifacts. You don't want to shift the whole thing down because the reflective white levels may have been at say 20 nits for a gray reflectance. And you don't want to take that down to 5 nits; it'll be way too dark. And so this whole relative luminance, it doesn't work as well for high dynamic range. And so another change here with 2084 is we really are tying it to a reference rendering in a particular surround, and then saying to the home television, display, and player manufacturers to adapt that signal so that it will look as good as it can in the home environment.
So in other words, your 2084 says now you want to master to a particular peak luminance value, and then if the TV can't do that, it needs to be able to gracefully and intelligently, hopefully, roll that off in a way that doesn't clip and doesn't create these artifacts you were talking about.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly correct. And another aspect of 2084, which also was a key feature of the MovieLabs next generation video proposal, is we really wanted to have something that was future-proof. So you look at, BT 709 was standardized in the 90s, and we're still limited by it, even though displays evolved quite a lot in the 2000s. But they couldn't adapt. There wasn't a way to go to, at least not an easy way to go to colors outside of the 709 gamut. There wasn't a way to go to a higher peak luminance than 100 nits. And so in having this future-proof target, 2084 actually goes to a very high peak luminance. The peak luminance is 10,000 nits.
Holy smokes!
Holy smokes! But now we realize displays are not going to be there, for quite some time. It might even take a completely different display technology where, I might be able to have a few pinpoints at 10,000 nits so that those those speculars are really rendered very authentically. But you're not going to want to take the average picture level up really much higher than it is today. But
right. In fact, this is an argument I get sometimes from people about high dynamic range of saying, and they say, well, look, if you increase the peak luminance, aren't we going to burn our retinas and have to wear sunglasses? And, what's that could be dangerous. And I'm going, no. You don't understand. We're not going to get to actual looking straight at the sun levels by any stretch of the imagination. All you're doing here, what you just said, is allowing for plenty of headroom and for future improvements wherein you might have a tiny reflection at that level, which you would see out in the real world anyway, more than that even. But it's still, I don't think, is going to be dangerous or painful for people to watch.
No, precisely. I mean, and you look at the way that content has been mastered, especially theatrical content. Sometimes for the demonstrations that you see at NAB, sometimes people get a little bit carried away.
Yeah.
But it's going to be the responsibility of the director and cinematographer, not to make their viewer uncomfortable, right? I mean, to use this technique creatively and gracefully, rather than trying to hit people over the head with it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's going to be a lot of evolution, because we're still in early days as far as the creative community actually experimenting with high dynamic range and really trying to understand how they will use it, because it's it's a new tool, and it's a very powerful tool. But
as you say, though, we're in the early days, and that could lead in some cases to some gimmicky stuff. For example, in the early days of 3D, we saw a lot of gimmicky stuff. In the early days of surround music mixing, we heard a lot of gimmicky stuff, but it improved over time.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably see the same thing here. And hopefully we don't alienate too many people with too much of the early experimentation that
I hope not too, because from what I've seen, and you've seen demonstrations of high dynamic range, I have as well. It blows my socks off, really. So much better. It looks so much better than what we're used to, that I really want people to go out and see it.
Yeah, and it can have a range of different effects. Disney did a short called Telescope, a science fiction short, where they have the hyperspace sequences where the sparks are flying all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very, very intense. Then it's sort of the other end of the spectrum. MovieLabs, we had the Digital Cinema Initiative's standard evaluation material, which was shot on film, the STEM remastered for HDR. And instead, it brings out the colors more. The scenes with the candles and the lights, they just sparkle. The reflections off of the champagne glasses. It just kind of makes it a little more magical. And so
without hitting you over the head.
Exactly. And so I think with those two as anchor points, there's going to be a lot of experimentation in between. I think it's actually going to be a lot of fun to see how it gets used.
Have you actually seen Disney's Tomorrowland in high dynamic range? It's only available in, I think, 4 theaters around the country. San Francisco isn't one of the cities where it is, but you might have seen it someplace.
I have not yet. I need to get out of San Francisco and go to one of those theaters.
You need to come down to L.A., go to the El Capitan, which is where it's showing. And I have seen it, and I think it's remarkable.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to all of the content that's going to be coming out, especially now that the next generation Ultra HD Blu-ray has indicated they're going to have HDR support.
Exactly.
So getting back to this future proofing and this huge volume we're establishing, so that actually required and motivated a second standard, which is the third of the trio, ST2086, which is mastering display metadata. So again, in terms of trying to encapsulate this reference rendering on a particular mastering display, it's important to capture the peak luminance of that display. So if it's a 4,000 nit peak luminance display, well, you're not going to have to worry about anything going up to 10,000. And so this is also a way that the downstream devices can manage the content most effectively. So if they do want to compress in the range or color gamut, they can do that gracefully and without worrying that they're doing too much because they think they have to move the 2020 primaries all the way into P3, or they need to move the 10,000 level down to 1,000 or less. And so this mastering display metadata defines the RGB primaries and the minimum and maximum luminance of the display, which is then transmitted as metadata along with the signal, so that a display can make the best decisions about how to render it for a particular environment.
Okay, so the content might be be mastered to 1,000 nits or 4,000 nits with BT 2020 colors, but then that metadata and that content hits a display that has lesser capabilities. The display should be able to then handle it and reduce it appropriately to what it can do gracefully, as you say.
Yes, and there also is a lot additional work going on in SMPTE currently around metadata that might actually dynamically drive this tone mapping on a scene-by-scene basis. So if you look at the extreme case of saying wanting to take 4,000 nit mastered content, 4,000 nits is sort of the limit of current mastering displays that are available for the studio's use currently. And let's say you actually want to take that all the way down to a standard dynamic range television, one that might be 100 nits or 200 nits. When you get to that kind of level, traditionally in the studio grading process, they will master initially for digital cinema, which is the crown jewels, and then they will, because the 709 home entertainment content, that's a different enough target, they actually manually go in and make what's called a trim pass to adjust the colors and the brightnesses so that it will look good on that home entertainment home display. But now we're introducing another display in between. So now we're introducing perhaps a 1,000 nit consumer display, and maybe content's being mastered at 4,000, or maybe it's being displayed down at 800. A lot of that a display can probably do independent of the scene in just by applying a fixed tone map. But you can always make it better by actually having dynamic metadata that may have been adjusted or created by a colorist to do that tone mapping. And then you actually could, with this type of metadata, go all the way down from an HDR signal all the way down to an SDR signal, and still have a very good looking picture.
Now, you mentioned mastering or grading for movies, for cinema, and then for home, and that being two different things. I was under the pretty distinct impression that cinema dynamic range is even less than home dynamic range, standard home dynamic range.
I think it's comparable. A lot of it depends upon how dark the surround is, and whether. And
in a movie theater, it's very dark.
Yes, well, depending. I mean, those exit signs, and if the walls aren't painted black, even there it can be less than optimal.
Yeah, but in a cinema, the peak luminance is typically 48 nits, I believe, whereas at home currently it's 100.
Yeah, so the peak brightness is definitely lower for digital cinema, but also the black level renditions that you can get to are also better, at least better than traditional LCD panels have been able to get to.
Yeah, although with local dimming and some other kinds of technologies, you can get that down pretty far.
With OLEDs and local dimming, both those technologies enable
I will tell you this, on Tomorrowland, the black levels are stunning compared to what I normally see in a digital cinema theater. The black levels on using this Dolby Vision projection, which gets us back to Dolby Vision. They've applied it also to commercial cinema as well as to home displays. It really makes a big difference in the black levels as well as the peak luminance or peak brightness.
Yeah, and so
anyway.
I mean, yeah, the mastering reference is a very important aspect of this. So with these standards defined in SMPTE, and the third of them, by the way, is one for XYZ to allow color differencing. So you can generate a YCC signal from XYZ so that it could be encoded with an MPEG codec. So we took these three standards to MPEG, and they are now referenced in the latest edition of HEVC, and will shortly be in the updated version of ABC, the previous H.264 codec.
Oh wow, that's great! I didn't know that.
And they also have been adopted by CEA and HDMI. So the latest CEA 861 specification. So 861 is the specification that forms the underlying electronic formats for devices to communicate with displays. And so it supports 601 and 709 and 2020, and now it has added this additional 2084 EOTF as well as the 2086 mastering display metadata. And subsequently, that was also adopted by HDMI in their 2.0 A specification. So we now have basically, with the combination of ST2084, ST2086, and the HEVC main 10-bit profile, we have now a complete HDR standardized video solution. Sometimes it's called HDR10. And this is basically...
Is that because it uses 10 bits?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the studios, we'd still like to get to 12 bits. There are still some cases where you'll get a little bit of banding or quantization in 10-bit, but often the noise level is high enough in content that it masks the contouring that you would see.
Okay.
But this standard is adopted by Blu-ray for the Ultra HD specification as their HDR format. Blu-ray additionally supports other systems for HDR in addition. I think you were mentioning the multiplicity of standards that often come out.
This is something I want to talk about actually in the few minutes we have left. The fact that we now have a standard published by standards bodies, SMPTE, ITU, CEA, which is on the consumer electronic side of things. The HDMI group has all adopted this complete system whereby high dynamic range can be represented, but it's not the only one. There's Dolby Vision, which I mentioned a little while ago. Another system by Philips, by Technicolor, by BBC. This concerns me because of the multiplicity of standards. Ultra HD Blu-ray has adopted the SMPTE standard, but I believe they also allow Dolby Vision.
Yes, and also Philips.
And also Philips. Okay, so what happens when, if and I assume when, we have content that has been encoded with one or another of these systems and it hits a TV, and will the TV know how to handle multiple of them, or will it only have one in it, depending on what the manufacturer chooses? And if it only has one and it gets a different one, what'll it do?
that is a challenge, and I think there are two areas of challenge. One of them is how many different times, different targets will a studio have to master the content to? Well,
exactly.
Also have to master to each of these formats. The extent to which you can interconvert between the different formats without loss, and then what does the display actually end up taking as its input?
Yep.
So some of these systems, require a different decoder. So the at least one instantiation of the Dolby Vision system is a dual layer system where you'll have a base layer, could be a AVC or an HEVC encoded layer, which you can render independently. So that could be a standard dynamic range signal. It could be a 10-bit high dynamic range signal.
Oh, the base layer doesn't have to be standard dynamic range. I kind of thought that's what it was with a secondary layer with the HDR, high dynamic range metadata or information in it, which the regular TV could just ignore.
No, there are different variants that are possible, and in the case of Blu-ray, it's a 10-bit HDR base layer, which then extends out to 12 bits with the enhancement layer. So this is the way that the studios get the 12 bits that they've been wanting. But then in the other instantiation, the one that you mentioned, that one has a very strong advantage if you're delivering the same stream or the same copy, say physically, to both SDR and HDR displays, because you can simply play back the SDR version on the SDR display, and it plays normally. And if you have HDR, then you need this dual layer decoder, which will combine those two decoded streams and into an output. But getting back to how different displays and things will deal with this. So with the ST2084 EOTF was actually developed primarily by Dolby. It's called the perceptual quantizer transfer function, and it basically is a fit to the human perceptual response. And so if you do have a signal which has been decoded to 12 bits, for example, a Dolby Vision system, it could go out as ST2084 from a playing device to a display device.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, or oftentimes now decoders are integrated into the television set, in which case, the signal that's coming in might be, one of these proprietary single or dual layer systems.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about PQ for just a moment, perceptual coding or PQ. I have one more graphic to show everybody, which is called gamma versus PQ. We're running a little out of sequence here, but okay. So you've seen this graph, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about what we're looking at.
Yeah, so the dotted line there, the gray dotted line you're seeing is a perceptual model of the human visual system response. It's called the Barton ramp. And the curves that you see there are different transfer functions and different bit depths. So what we're seeing here, we care probably most strongly about is the 10-bit PQ versus 12-bit PQ and 15-bit gamma. So what we can see here is that anything that is below the Barton curve, so down and to the left, is going to be below the human perceptual threshold. Anything that's above and to the right is potentially above the threshold and could cause banding or contouring. What you see here is that 10-bit PQ, which follows that ramp, is pretty good, pretty close. It's a little bit above the perceptual threshold. To really get completely below it, which is our goal, we would go to 12 bits. What we don't see here is how bad 10-bit gamma would be. You can sort of see that to get to PQ level quality in the blacks, down here at the 1/100th of a nit level, you really need to get to go to 15-bit gamma. If you look at the other gamma values, you would kind of just shift this curve, that blue 15-bit gamma curve, up parallel.
Up and to the right, yeah.
Up parallel, but just parallel to where it is currently.
Right.
And what you would see is that actually 10-bit gamma gives way too many code values at the high luminance levels, which you can see 15-bit gamma is doing as well.
It's wasting a lot of gamma of information there.
Right, but then below a transition point, probably in the 1 to 10 nit range, you'd start seeing gamma not having enough code values. And so you actually would still be getting some quantization in the blacks. And so that's what makes the PQ perceptual curve really, I think a significant innovation, is it covers the dynamic range very efficiently from a code value perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? We've come to the end of a fabulous hour already. I mean, can you believe it?
Well, I think we have a great year ahead here. I mean, with both rollouts in high dynamic range in digital cinema, with Tomorrowland currently in a very select set of theaters, and Ultra HD Blu-ray launching this year. And Fox, I think, just announced that they're going to be mastering all of their new feature films in high dynamic range. So I think anyone who's interested in a better home consumer video experience, there's going to be a lot of exciting thing happening over the next year or two.
Very exciting times. With a lot of dust yet to settle, though, I think is what I'm getting here. Do you agree?
No doubt. Well, a lot of the international broadcast groups like ATSC, which does terrestrial broadcast standards in the U.S., the ITU R is defining an international video standard to support HDR. There are a lot of standards that are going to be needing to adopt HDR. I think Cable Labs announced that they're going to be supporting PQ and 2084 in next generation set-top boxes. That's what their current target is. But each one of these different groups is going to have an opportunity to weigh in as to which of these different systems they think meets their needs the best. And so, yeah, it'll be a lot of interesting times in the standards committees.
No kidding. Well, and you're going to be right in the thick of it. And so hopefully, once the dust settles, as I said, you'll come back and share with us sort of where the asymptote is leading to, if you will. Would sure love to have you back. Thank you so much.
I'd be glad to come back. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks. That's Jim Helman, CTO at MovieLabs. You can read more about MovieLabs at movielabs.com. And as we said earlier, if you want to check out the next generation video specification that MovieLabs has published, it's a very interesting document. Simply go to movielabs.com/NG video for next generation video. You can find me always at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Chris Chinnock, the founder and president of Insight Media, a research firm in the field of video, who will be talking with us live and direct from the Society of Information Display, or SID conference, where he will be talking about what he sees there at that conference, and also what he's expecting to see at the Display Summit and Infocom conferences, which are being held the following week in Orlando, Florida. So there'll be a ton of stuff to talk about in terms of displays and where we're going. Lots more interesting things to discuss. So I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.